Now what will it be? Death or exile?
Welcome everyone to another Exiles film review. We love to give you our spoiler-free reviews of films that have just come out to let you know what we think and to try and help inform your decision on whether that might be a film for you to go and see or not. But every now and then we think it's important to revisit some of our favourite films in a deeper, long-form fashion. We aren't critics or reviewers, we're just film fans who really love to analyse films. And this is what we're going to do today. Today, we're going to step into the Wayback Machine and dig up John Boorman's 1981 epic Excalibur. There's just so much to examine in this film, and I couldn't possibly do it alone. And thankfully, I don't have to. I'm joined by my two good friends and fellow Film Exiles. First of all, let me introduce you to Adrienne.
Hello, Chris, and hi, everybody.
Hi, Adrienne. And also with us today is fellow Film Exile, Manu.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
So, you excited to talk about this film?
Excited does not begin to describe my level of excitement for talking about this film.
Right, so let's just give the people a little taster of what this film is about. This film's a retelling of many stories of Arthurian legend, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, The Sword in the Stone, the Grail story. It's based on a 15th century Arthurian romance, Le Morte d'Arthur, by Thomas Malory. This film really doesn't have a traditional three-act structure, as far as I can tell anyway. The story is really all over the place. It's not just one story, it feels like 3 or 4 different Arthurian legends squashed into one film. First, you have a prelude, a history lesson, which ends in the classic Sword in the Stone story. It's told in a little bit of a rushed manner, with the squire Arthur pulling the sword from the stone, some accepting him as king and others not. We get a quick battle, acceptance, and that's also where Arthur meets Guinevere. Second, we get Arthur fighting Lancelot, who's blocking a bridge after defeating all of his knights. And then we get Arthur attempting to defeat him, but he can't. It results in an abuse of power of Excalibur defeating Lancelot, and then the eventual make-up and reconciliation of the two. Third, we get a love story, betrayal, and the fall of Arthur, and the introduction of who, in my opinion, is the actual hero of the story, Percival. The film becomes less about Excalibur at this point and more about the Grail, and how the betrayal of Guinevere and Lancelot of Arthur results in his downward spiral. Then we get the Grail Quest, where all the knights either fail or give up, and Percival perseveres, and this is what makes him the hero of the story for me. And then fifth, you get this kind of redemption story for Arthur, where he forgives Guinevere, fights alongside Lancelot and the remaining knights in the final battle to kill Mordred, sacrificing himself, and we all live happily ever after. So that is a huge kind of epic story with multiple different stories within it, each one with its own interesting arc. So we're going to try our best to get into the really interesting aspects of all of them. But just as an overall view, Manu, what is your general thoughts on the film?
I think the first word that comes to mind when I think about this movie is, like you said, non-traditional. I feel like this movie would not get made today. It really feels like a movie that was made in the mind and the heart of the director. So it's all about making choices, and some of these choices the audience might not agree with or might not like, but you can tell that there's a true vision there, that this man really put so much of himself into this final product. And The interesting thing about this movie is, for all intents and purposes, it could easily be considered a bad movie. There's so many poor elements. There's so many moments that just seem so ridiculous and unbelievable, and yet it has its own peculiar charm. It's hard to break your eyes away from it while you're watching it, and not in like, oh, this is a train wreck kind of way, but it's quite enjoyable. It really does it packs in quite a lot in its 2 hour and 20 minute runtime, and as much as we're gonna get into the finer points of it as we go, but overall it's a movie that I really really enjoyed and that I'm glad that it exists. It really made me feel a lot for its characters, and some of the cinematography is absolutely beautiful. And like I said, it kind of feels like, being taken back to a different time where Hollywood worked differently, where a movie like this, which is a big budget film, which is not cut down into a simple three-act structure like you mentioned, Chris. It has ups, it has downs, and you feel like you go through this journey with the characters. So I really enjoyed this movie.
Definitely. Adrian, how about you?
Well, I'll echo the same that technically there's a lot of things that are just maybe off, but I think the power of the film really is the power of the Arthurian legend, the power of the myth. And I looked into the history of it, and Mallory's text, Le Morte d'Arthur, was written in 1485, predating Shakespeare. So you kind
Okay.
of get the history, the tragedy, and the comedy of the story, and the seeds of the story actually go all the way back until the 6th century, where there was an Arthur-like warlord, a Roman or Welsh warlord and tactician who defeated the Saxons in an invasion, and he may have actually had a wife, Guinevere. So this goes back all the way to the 6th century and
Hmm.
predate, Shakespeare and that kind of thing. So this has been told and retold for hundreds of years, until it was finally written down, gathering tales from all over. And it wasn't until the 12th century where Geoffrey of Monmouth, we actually have 200 surviving copies of what he wrote down, where we first get Uther Pendragon and Igraine and Mordred
Hmm.
and Morgan Le Fay. But in that text, there was no Lancelot, there was no Grail, there was no Round Table. But the fact that we have 200 surviving copies is astounding,
Yeah.
of how popular and how enduring that the story is, because we only have 11 copies of Chaucer around to surviving copies. So it was huge. So it's no surprise to me that the archetypes and the characters and the scope is what make this Excalibur film, that it touches. It's like it still is resonating as story and with our souls because of everything that it touches on. So despite all of the odd technical things or the things that don't work, there's just something about the characters and the actual overall story that is worth revisiting.
Definitely. And you've said in previous reviews that works of Austen and Shakespeare lend themselves very well to constant retelling for every generation. I think that's definitely also the case with the Arthurian legend, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we just got Hellboy like last like a few months ago.
Yeah. And that was, yeah, they took from Arthurian legend as well, definitely. Um, yeah, from my perspective, my general thoughts on this film, yeah, this film is way more than the sum of its parts. We're going to get into the different technical aspects of the film a bit later, but on each individual one, you might find I'm a bit critical, um, maybe very critical on some of them. However, no matter what I say about them in isolation, you kind of have to disregard it, because the beauty of this film isn't in its individual attributes, but how they all work together in tandem. What I'll say, however, is that this film to me is back end heavy when it comes to quality. So I think the best acting performances, the best examples of cinematography, the best score, the more interesting themes, they all emerge for me in the second half of the film. So that's probably where I'll concentrate my positive comments on. So I think we should just go straight into it and talk about acting performances. I'll kick it off. There's some truly terrible acting in this film. There's some good acting as well, and on occasion they're sometimes from the same actor. Like, it's very imbalanced. We like to focus on the positives, but there's no getting around the performance of Nicol Williamson in this film for me. And Nicol Williamson is the actor who played Merlin, and there's a couple of instances where, like, for example, where Merlin is falling into the water near the bridge just before Arthur battles Lancelot, and it is like this slow motion cartoonesque, oh, I'm falling, ooh, okay, I'm falling now. His line delivery is way over the top, but I think I have to say, like, a lot of that might be to do with the ADR. This film has some very questionable ADR, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So I don't want to place all the fault on Nicol Williamson, but when you consider that the late great Max von Sydow was originally cast in that role, it kind of leaves me with what might have been. And I don't want to focus only on the negative. He does provide us with some really good performances in fits and starts, like, for example, when he's at the castle, when he's talking with Arthur, and Arthur asks him if Lancelot and Guinevere are together. That sequence there, his delivery is so good. But I think one scene encapsulates his imbalanced performance when he's near the end of the film, where he's talking to Arthur. Arthur asks him, are you really here? Or is it just a dream? He provides this really grounded, really deep delivery with a dream to some. Then the very next couple of words is a nightmare to others, which he delivers in the most cartoonish and over the top and ridiculous fashion I've ever seen in my life. So the less said about that, the better. I'll just definitely say that there are some great acting performances as well, and they come from people you would expect them to come from. So Liam Neeson, Patrick Stewart, and Helen Mirren, their performances are stunning. Manu, do you want to say something about the performance of the role of Arthur?
Yes, I would actually. I think I really, really like Nigel Terry's character because he has to play a wide range of Arthur. When we first meet him, he's still a squire. He's, just fetching not swords and carrying and helping out with horses. And by the end of the movie, he's the king of the land, and everybody depends on him and relies on him. So I really appreciate the range of that character that we got to see all in one film. I would have to say I think my favorite scene from him is right before the final battle, where he goes to find Guinevere, and they both forgive each other. I think that is a very poignant and beautiful scene between two characters that have been through a lot in this movie. Yeah, so I really, really thought Nigel Terry was great. Yeah, and there are others that, like you mentioned, and I think it's really cool that Boorman wanted to hire actors that weren't too well known at the time, because he wanted people to focus on the characters and not, the actors themselves, which can't happen if you cast like a big Hollywood stars in certain roles. So a lot of these people who are populating the film weren't well known at the time. Like, it's kind of like watching the movie and, like, oh my God, that's Patrick Stewart. Oh snap!
Yes.
Like, that's
Kieran
Liam.
Hines.
That's Liam Neeson. That's Liam
Yeah,
Neeson.
yeah. There's loads of Hollywood A-listers in this film before they were even moderately known.
Yeah, and I always love to see that. It's always great. Like, we saw it with the Social Network a few years ago, when you're able to get like a great cast of young actors that are going to become great, and you get them before they hit that greatness. I mean, so hats off to the casting department on this.
100%. Adrienne, is there any particular acting performances that you enjoyed?
Well, yes, Helen Mirren was wonderful, and Patrick Stewart, I think, were my two favorite. And I think that I was able to forgive some of the other performances because the actors were so committed to their emotions in the scenes that I could just take it. Like if I think of it more as a drama, or a play that I went to go see where, I'm sitting there, I know it's pretend even though it's live, that helped me a little bit. And then the other thing that helped me sort of forgive Merlin's performance was just like, because he's just supposed to be a little bit off. He's a mystery, so
True,
that also
true.
kept me in the film. It wasn't nothing was so bad that I completely lost the film.
Yeah, you couldn't accuse Nicole Williamson of not giving 100%. That's
You
for sure.
can't accuse him of giving 150 though. He gave a little
Yeah.
too much at times.
He had a little bit of hot sauce on that.
I see him as Merlin as a little bit of kind of a Gandalf kind of figure, where he's in and out. People don't really understand what he's up to, and he's just kind of weird. But everybody needs him for some reason.
That's a good comparison to, again, to Gandalf. It's really kind of cool to see how both of those series kind of really borrow from each other so much.
Definitely. All right, so let's move on from actors to their character arcs. If we look at the traditional hero's journey arc, who do you think had the most interesting one? I mean, from my perspective, it has to be Percival. Percival, in my opinion, is the only character really that you could consider as a common man. He is us on the screen. All the other characters are like noble or ordained or mysterious or have magic, except for him. Like, he is just a normal individual. He's not empowered. He's not got great fighting skills like Lancelot or anything. He's just a peasant. He bumps into Lancelot. He then gains the respect of the king and is knighted because he's the only one who was willing to come and defend the queen. And then he is the one who never gave up on the 20-year quest of finding the Grail. I mean, he even found the Grail and failed, but then still went back for a second time, which takes a lot of courage. And there was all these other characters in the film that were not as perseverant as him. And I think that is the key point here, that he just persevered through all of his misgivings and all of his limitations, and in the end he became the character that was the only one left, the only survivor. And I think it's a kind of nice way to end a film where he takes the greatest weapon ever known to man and he throws Excalibur into the lake, never to be seen again. Like, Percival is a peasant and he's just casually introduced in the middle of the film.
Which is
At
something
the
that
end-
I love. I
Yeah.
love that he's like, again, he goes to the non-traditional, I guess, ism of this movie.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like you would never see that because he plays such a big role in the events that take place, and yet he's not seen or heard from until almost halfway through the proceedings. I really really love that. It allows for us to spend time with Arthur and to meet the rest of the world and kind of learn how to interact with it and some of the rules of it before they introduce him to us. And like you said, at that point he does kind of feel like a member of the audience, just slinking onto the stage.
Yeah, he's introduced in the middle of the film, and by the end of the film, he is the most important character in the whole land, and he'll be fine without this magic sword. He doesn't need it, and that's what I think. There's a beauty there with Arthur telling him to throw it away, that you, Percival, you're so special that you don't need this sword. And I think that is the beautiful part of this film, that even Arthur needed Excalibur, but Percival doesn't going forward. I think that's beautiful. What other arcs did you find interesting, Manu?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. I love the Arthurian legend, and I really love the way that Arthur's story is told in this movie. This movie that's like 4 movies. I really love how, we meet him right before he finds the sword, and we get to see him grow into his own. We get to see him become the head of the round table, the head of the kingdom. We see him garner favor and respect of his people, and then we also see him lose it. We see him lose faith. We see him lose hope. We see him lose everything that he's built and that he's worked so hard for. And we see the man that he becomes. Like when we see him as that old, disabled person that can't even move from the chair until he's saved. I mean, it's such a great representation of how even the mightiest of all of us can fall. But then his ability to find his way back through the help of others, and regaining his seat of power, even for a little while, in order to do the right thing and to cast out the evil that he had helped to bring into the world. I think that is just a truly poetic story, and Bowman and Nigel Terry did such a great job telling it, especially when you consider that there's so much else going on in this movie. And although Percival is the heart of the story, Arthur is still its backbone. Arthur, it's still its spine, and he's never forgotten. And I love that there was enough time for both of these characters to truly shine and show the audience what makes them special.
Definitely. I think the balance of timing as well, like you mentioned, a lot of the first half of the film is Arthur, a lot of the second half of the film is Percival, and at the end, the film ends with both of them. The film ends with that interaction of Arthur with Percival. And I think that's very poetic. Adrienne, tell us, what is one of your favorite character arcs in this film?
Well, I agree with you both about Percival and Arthur, and they both have that, the good in them. And so I think Morgana's arc, and in contrast, being the evil behind the scenes, is fascinating, and a fascinating comparison. Because like today, if they were to tell the story, or if they would make this film today, I swear we would just start in the middle, and then we would get, everything from the beginning with Morgana and her witnessing her mother being assaulted would be something that we would get in flashback.
We would get it in flashback or dialogue or something like that. You wouldn't get it in full exposition like that.
Right. So the fact that we see it from the beginning, we're not surprised, and we understand her motivations, and think that, that it's possible that she could be justified, or at least we really understand it, even though it would be better if she would choose to be more on the, right side of history and not, conceive Modred and stuff. But all of that, the fruit of the evil, and to see all of that in contrast to, just makes Percy and Arthur's story stand out even more.
And that's the true test of a great villain in film, is when you as a member of the audience can understand their motivations. And we definitely do that. I mean, we see it from the history lesson at the beginning, how Uther uses magic to make himself look like Igraine's husband, and Morgana is there witnessing this. And then Morgana comes into the film again as an adult, like she wants to learn the arts of magic from Merlin, kind of living in Camelot. And then she uses that, and you kind of understand her plan.
Mm-hmm.
Because she uses that advantage of living in there, taking the knowledge from Merlin, and then becoming that villain. So it's a really, really great arc.
Absolutely.
I think Lancelot also has a pretty good. I think Lancelot is actually well. What's the word I'm looking for? I think he's pretty well represented here as well. Yeah, I think they do a very good job with him. We see him going from being this cocky warrior, and we see him fall in love with Arthur's wife, and betraying Arthur, which is a very key aspect of this film. Like, that betrayal basically breaks the world, and I think that the actor, as well as his representation in the film, is very well handled.
Well, you mentioned that point where it's the end of the world, or the changing of the world. Tell me about how that is represented in terms of the cinematography of the film, and how Boorman uses a visual storytelling to convey that to us.
Well, in the scene where we find Guinevere and Lancelot sleeping together, and Arthur discovers this, he plants Excalibur into the ground, and which separates the two of them.
So we think that he's going to kill them at that
Yes,
moment, right?
yes, but actually, what we do see on screen is a sword piercing through Merlin, which leads to Merlin's death. And just that visual representation of the sword cutting through Merlin is more than just Merlin being taken away. Merlin is one of the last aspects of the old world, of the old gods, because that's also something that's very important in Arthurian legend. It's the death of the old gods and the birth of Christianity. And
Mm-hmm.
Merlin leaving the world, Merlin leaving Arthur's world, is basically like magic leaving the earth. So that moment where we see that betrayal that was so deep that it changed the world as we knew it.
Yeah, and at that moment, we were flashing between the scenes of Arthur finding Guinevere and Lancelot, and Morgana is with Merlin, and she's asking for some last bit of magical knowledge that he hasn't given her yet. We're flashing between the two scenes, and yeah, that's some great cinematography to have highlighted. I noticed an interesting parallel between Morgana offering Percival the chalice to drink from, and also Guinevere offering Gawain Lancelot's chalice to drink from. They're both really chalices of falsehood. I mean, Guinevere is trying to convince Gawain that she and Lancelot are innocent, and while they hadn't done anything physical at that point, they were guilty in the heart. So she was trying to tell Gawain, take this cup and drink from it, and then you will accept my innocence, which she really wasn't. And then you've got Morgana offering the chalice to Percival to drink from, and they both rejected it, and they were both right. And that's why I actually think, while Percival is the only true noble everyman character in the film, I do also think out of all the other knights, Gawain is just as noble, but obviously he's a knight, so he has this kind of advantage that Percival doesn't have. Adrienne, do you have any points of cinematography or visual storytelling that you found interesting?
Well, the talking about drinking things, I think of peach tea. Like, okay, we're not interested in your peach tea and your lies, you know.
That's a great point, because there's many parallels between BVS and Excalibur, and basically, yeah, Lex Luthor offering that peach tea to the senator as well, but also we see many times that Wonder Woman, Diana Prince, rejects drinks throughout the film. So I think there's definitely an interesting parallel there.
Yeah, what they're consuming, what they're taking in, and what they believe and what they don't believe.
Mm.
So then the other scene where Percival sees God twice, those sequences, the first time he goes as a knight and all of his armor, sort of with his status and all this exterior stuff. And then there's the other scene where it's sort of like the way David did. David put on the other knight's armor and he wasn't used to it, you know, and so he threw it off before fighting Goliath. And Percival does the same thing. He sheds all of his armor underwater. You know, he's just purely himself, just his humble, selfless character, you know, and he shed that under the water. So it's like a kind of baptism. And then he goes as a man, and this humble man, and this sort of like, you know, purity, and he's able to receive the Grail.
Definitely. Manu, have you got any others?
Another thing that I found really interesting was at the end when Arthur finally kills his son, Mordred. It's a lot like the way that Superman finishes off Doomsday in the Batman v Superman. We have the green weapon, and it pierces through the skin, and then he has to add in more of his own strength, and as he's driving the opponent's weapon further into himself, causing him to die. I thought that was another wonderful parallel between
That's right,
these two movies.
But also, that's similar to Star Trek Nemesis. Shinzen, who's impaled by a pole, pulls himself towards Captain Jean-Luc Picard, and as you will probably know, Jean-Luc Picard is played by Sir Patrick Stewart, who is also in this film playing Leon Grace. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing to pick up on as well.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like I said. Like this movie seems to have touched a lot of filmmakers from that that grew up around that era.
Oh, and another scene that I wanted to mention was at the end after the sword has been thrown back to the Lady of the Lake and Arthur's on the boat and they're sailing into the sunset was just, I don't know, I got chills. And it reminds me, him leaving the realm of men, kind of going into the light, like whether that's heaven or not, was very Lord of the Rings-like to me.
And I think that's interesting based on the fact that Boorman almost did Lord of the Rings before having the chance to do Excalibur. Actually, he was. I think he even had a script ready and everything. I think he was pretty set on doing it.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of the scenes that he shot in Excalibur were shot on sets that he was gonna use for the Lord of the Rings.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so like the one where Gawain is fighting with Lancelot. That set was meant to be where the elves were. Let's move on to score and sound editing at this point. There's a lot to say here, so I'll start with the negative and we'll work our way up. From a technical standpoint, this film has some of the worst quality ADR I have ever seen. For those that don't know, ADR is automated dialogue replacement, and it's basically you've filmed the film and then you have it playing on a screen and you get the actors to record in a studio so that then they can put the sound from the studio and sync it up with the film instead of having sound from the set. The advantages of that is you get nice, clearer quality sound, but the disadvantage is that if it's not aligned properly or if it's delivered in a different way, it stands out like a sore thumb. And from a viewer's perspective, at some points, mostly at the start of the film, again, I think this film is back-end heavy in terms of quality. So mostly at the start of the film, it really threw me out of the movie. I don't know about you guys, but
it did. It's hard to miss it.
Yeah, I was so focused on the story elements that I was just kind of ignoring all that because you'd prepared me ahead of time.
Yeah.
I was ready to just focus on story and emotions and that kind of thing. So
yeah, it's one of the things that I always tell people before they watch the film. Just a warning, this is a really great film, but don't turn it off if after 30 minutes you start getting annoyed by X, Y, or Z. So just stick with it and you'll get over it, and you do. So by the end of the film, or I'd even say by halfway through the film, you kind of get used to it. And not only do you get used to it, it kind of elevates the movie in a weird way, and it kind of gives it some strange, otherworldly, epic feel. I just can't even explain it, but just stick with the film. Don't give up if you think it's bad. And in terms of the score, I think that the score is brilliant, mostly brilliant. There is a couple of points in the film where they insert loud and blaring in all its glory O Fortuna, which is a medieval Latin Gothic musical piece. It's very famous. It's really great music, but it just doesn't fit in this film for me. I think the original score by Trevor Jones is truly incredible. For 90% of the film, it uses original score, and I think it's fantastically done. Manu, have you got anything to say about the score?
I would say that to me, the score is a lot like the rest of the movie. It's incredibly schizophrenic. Like there's some great moments in there, and there's some moments where the score really swells and sounds, especially during some of the battle sequences and those speeches that Arthur gives. I think the score works there. But then there's other bits where sometimes there will be like weird beats that are chosen,
Hmm.
and again there are choices made, and like I said earlier, you might like them, you might not, but some of them kind of just threw you out of the movie.
It makes it kind of campy a bit, I think.
Yeah, it's weird. So, Adrian, did you have any other pieces of the score that you either liked or disliked?
Well, I agree with what you guys have said so far, and the music when everything having to do with the sword with the lady in the lake, that comes out of the water and when it goes back, I thought those were really beautiful and really powerful.
Definitely. That piece of the score is incredible. We should probably move on to some themes now, and this film is littered with religious themes and other themes as well. But one of my favourites is where Lancelot pierces his own side with his own sword in a battle with himself, where he's trying to purge himself from his love for Guinevere. He asks God to help him from himself. While the exact etymology of the name Lancelot isn't known, it's possibly an old French diminutive of Lanzo, which kind of means lance, I think. Manu will correct me, the French speaker among us.
I think you're on the right path, so you're
All
good.
right. All right, okay. I think it's interesting that Lancelot inflicts the same injury that the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny, inflicts on Jesus Christ during his crucifixion. Without getting too biblical, just a bit of background for those who might not be aware. According to the Gospel of St. John, whilst on the cross, the Romans planned to break Jesus' legs, which was a method used to hasten death during a crucifixion. But before they did that, they realized that he was already dead. So there was no point to start breaking legs and stuff. But to make sure that he was dead, one of the Roman soldiers stabbed him in the side with a spear. So that's the background of the Spear of Destiny. So we kind of get this little dream sequence, let's say, where Lancelot, in other words, the Holy Lance of this story, stabs what he perceives to be his sinful self in the side. And there's a couple of ideas to play around with here. So first, in the Bible story, Jesus isn't really the villain or the sin that he's perceived to be by the Romans. So comparing that with this story, can love ever be considered a sin? Should Lancelot's love for Guinevere be considered a sin if they never acted upon it? So that's one idea. And then the second idea is Lancelot kills that love he had for Guinevere, and that's proven by his ability to win the fight with Gawain to clear their names. But as we see a few scenes later, that love is resurrected as Guinevere goes and finds him, and they do the dirty on Arthur. But this is similar to when the Roman soldier who stabbed Jesus to make sure he was dead in the Bible didn't actually achieve that either, because a few days later Jesus was resurrected. So there's a kind of parallel there of what is killed is being resurrected, i.e. the love of Guinevere and Lancelot, and also Jesus in the Bible. So there's a couple of interesting ideas to do with that scene, which I think is one of my favorite scenes of the film and really powerful thematically. What do you guys think of that? Adrienne, you got anything to add?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really think that there's a lot that you can get out of that dream sequence without really expecting to think about it. I was reminded of when Jacob in the Bible wrestled with the angel of the Lord, I think is how it's termed in scripture. He wrestles with the Lord, and then the angel touches his hip, and because Jacob is saying, bless me, and then he gets touched in the hip or whatever. And so I was reminded of that, and then I was also reminded of the Apostle Paul, who was, given a thorn in the side. So this injury to the side, I just kept thinking about. And I don't know how that all plays out with a fight, and then having something where somebody's in the wrong direction and then sort of being turned into the right direction. I have to think about that some more.
Definitely. Manu, do you have anything to add, or any other theme that you want to talk about?
I wanted to talk about how in the film really feels like a passing on of the torch, in a lot of ways, and mostly, primarily, the death of Merlin and magic, and more of a turn away from the old ways and the old gods, and towards, a new form of life for humanity. And I think that we see it in the end when Arthur's body is whisked away from the battlefield, on that boat. It's as though he was the final vestige of that magic. And now we have Percival, like you mentioned earlier. He's the last survivor. He's the last remaining one, the one true humble man. And that it seems like it truly does feel like it is the beginning of the era of man to kind of grow and to implant itself onto the planet. And I think that it's a really interesting theme to think and talk about, especially considering how far we've come, what we've become as a society, how we've turned towards technology to replace magic. And you could make the claim that losing magic cost us to lose a lot of who we are and what have made us who we were as a society and as individuals and human beings. Technology is a lot colder. It's a lot more distant, as where magic seemed to force and bring people closer together, not just to each other, but to nature. And I think that we've embedded within ourselves this ideal that we are from the earth and not of the earth. And somehow we have tempted to fight our true nature and become something that we're not. And I think that the reason why these stories of knights and honor and dragons and fantasy and magic still have such a deep thrust within ourselves is because of what they represent. Is because they represent a time where we were better linked to the planet, to the Mother Earth, and to all that it had to offer us, instead of the cold steel of technology and science that we've made our new gods.
That's really interesting because it kind of brings into focus different parts of our modern world as well. Like you have more ancient cultures than the ones in the West that still practice this one with the land, which is a theme of the film actually, that Arthur is one with the land. So when Arthur is sick, the land becomes sick. I think that's really interesting. We see that ancient cultures in the world today still hold on to those traditions. So like the Chinese culture, they have Chinese medicine and they have Western medicine. Western medicine being the scientific medicine, but they still make use of ancient Chinese medicines, which a lot of Chinese people still swear by. And you get that in African cultures, South American cultures, basically cultures of the old world, that we in the West have pretty much lost.
Yeah, exactly.
Adrienne, do you have anything to add or have a different theme that you're interested in talking about?
Well, to piggyback off of what Manu said about more of the medieval kind of mindset, is that everything was so much more connected. Like we understood ourselves in relation to time and our environment and the cycles of the seasons and all of that. There was more of a connectedness and order and understanding, I think. And then with modern man and the scientific revolution, we have things are broken apart, and modern man is more fragmented. Even the fact that our stories now, we have all of our stories, we have stories are broken up into all these different genres, where here we're talking about why this particular film is so different and unusual, is because it has all those different things integrated into one story. That's really, we're saying that this story is non-traditional, but this actually is the tradition, and we're fragmented now. So So expanding on that, order versus disorder. I think when we hear the land Camelot and people's conception of that, even with the Kennedys and being this Camelot, like it has this elevated, high concept of order and beauty and truth and goodness and everything in its place, right? And so Camelot, is ordered, and then it's fallen into disorder. And so, with the you and the land are one, you see when the people are broken, the land is broken, and then you want everything to get back to order. So when the Excalibur is thrown back into the lake, it's sort of an act of trust in the order of everything. And that's what I get out of that. And one more theme that I noticed was about love in the story, where in the very beginning you have Uther taking Igraine by force, and then Arthur asking Merlin, can you make her love me? Arthur and Guinevere sort of have this, the king-queen arrangement, and then contrasting those with Lancelot and Guinevere is this courtly love ideal of falling in love with the person for who they are, which is different from, the other relationships in the story. So the other thing from my research has shown me that we can thank a French troubadour poet for bringing in the Lancelot and that story. So that was something that was added in later.
And that's a mainstay. That's a mainstay of Arthurian legend now, really. And to think that it was just added in is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that betrayal, the love and the courtly love and the betrayal at the same time, another parallel or opposites.
Yeah. So how about we kind of shift onto our favorite and least favorite moments of the film? Manu, do you have any particular favorite moments that you want to talk about?
I have a few, but I really want to focus on the moment where Percival appears in Arthur's bedroom with the cup, and he brings him back. Everything from that point on, everything that happens after that, I think is just incredible. I think that's really my favorite section of the film. Seeing Arthur go see his ex-wife, get Excalibur back, and kind of learn how to forgive one another. And the final battle and all of it leading towards Arthur leaving the land and Percival throwing away Excalibur. I think all of that section, I think it's perfect. I love all of that. And another favorite moment of mine is earlier in the film when Arthur and his knights have just won a great battle, and Arthur's giving this great speech, and they're all circled even before the table has been brought forth.
Yeah,
And
that's where he mentions that he's gonna build a table, a round table, and they're all stood in a circle. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and then they all put up their swords to a beautiful night sky full of stars, and it just seems to like direct and point to such a great and bright future.
Definitely. There's a couple for me. We were talking about parallels with BVS before. There's actually a little kind of a snippet of a line where, when Morgana traps Merlin, he kind of gets encased in this crystal structure, and Morgana tells him, "You're nothing, you're not a god, you're not a man." And that kind of brings back memories of BVS again, where Batman says to Superman, "You're not a god, you're not even a man." Where he stood over him with the spear. I think that's pretty cool. The main parts that I really loved in this film, my most memorable moments, have to be Percival's Grail Quest. Just before he finds Morgana's cave, he's been on this search for 10 years at this point, and you see him up at the top of a snowy mountain, and he sees another knight kneeling down, and he goes to him. He says, "Have you found it? Have you found the Grail?" And then the more close he gets to it, he realizes that this knight is dead, is just a skeleton. And when he reaches there, and he falls to his knees, and there's this beautiful bit of acting from Paul Jeffrey where he just kneels down and he's like, "We will never find it. it's just great acting. But then also, like, when he gets to Morgana's cave and he's faced with Morgana and she gives that line, "There is no grail, as these good knights have found. They serve me instead. There are many pleasures in this world, many cups to drink from, and they shall all be yours. Drink." And then Percival's temptation is like almost next to nothing. Just goes to his character, how noble he is and how honest he is. He's just instantly like, "No!" And then he throws them away, and then he's hung up, and then he sees God for the first time. Interestingly, there's a kind of hint at this point where he first sees God, where he sees him. So he's being hung up by a noose. When you see Percival going to see God for the first time, like as Adrienne mentioned earlier, with all his knight's armor, he's walking into the entrance of Camelot. So that's the first hint to us as the audience that God is in Camelot. And when we find out eventually from the second time, after Percival is on the precipice of death again from drowning, and he enters the entrance of Camelot without any clothes on, without any armor, again it's in Camelot, and this time he knows what is the secret of the Grail, who does it serve, and Percival's answer is, of course, "You, my lord. Who am I? You are the Lord and King. You are Arthur. And have you found the secret that I have lost? Yes, you and the land are one," which again ties into one of the themes that Manu brought up of Arthur being one with the land. When Arthur is sick, the land is sick, and how we as humans have shifted our attention from being from the earth and not of the earth. So again, that's another brilliant, memorable part of the film for me. So like I say, basically everything to do with Percival's quest for me is stunning. Adrienne, do you have any favorite, least favorites, memorable moments from the film?
I got chills when Percival returned the Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. And since the whole film, in the beginning, you have disorder and, through the different things in the film trying to achieve order. So the fact that that comes full circle with the sword, I loved that part. That's my favorite.
Definitely an incredible moment where he goes to the lake, he goes to throw it in, and then he decides against it, still convinced that, what if we need this in the future? Who could possibly deal with this problem and solve this problem without this most powerful weapon? And then Arthur's like, "No, you have to throw it away. I trust you to take care of things." And yeah, it's beautiful.
It's an act of trust, and I see it, the Lady of the Lake as a contrast, she's the magical good, and where Morgana is the magical bad. So then everything being back restored that way. Like the feminine elements and characters are a wonderful counterpart, and everything I think is done so well with that.
Yeah, definitely it provides a perfect balance to the film. And this film, as Manu said, it is a very balanced film. Like it goes up and it comes down, and it's, everything is chaotic, everything is in order. It really, really is a well-written story. And there's so many more great moments as well that we wish we could do 2 podcasts on it. Maybe you can squeeze some in here if you've got any final thoughts on the film. Manu, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I guess I want to touch back on what I said at the beginning about how watching this movie felt so refreshing because it gives us an insight into what filmmaking was back then. And even though it's been 30 years, over 30 years, almost 40 since this movie was released, it's really great to still be able to see how relevant and timely a lot of this stuff is. And again, I think that, like we mentioned earlier, it all goes back to how incredible the Arthurian legend is and how well it holds up after so many centuries. The film has so much ridiculous stuff in it, but it still ends up being such a terrific experience. And Having this conversation with you two over the last hour or so has really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that I missed, and definitely gonna watch it again and try to pick out more information and more of these themes that we talked about. So that like final thoughts is just this is a movie that you really have to open your mind and give a chance to and really think about. You can't just sit there and watch it and just like let it unfold in front of you. You have to engage with the material and I think that that's something that we're always trying to encourage our audience to do.
For sure. I'll just add my quick final thoughts here as well. That yeah, this film, as I mentioned earlier, is definitely more than the sum of its individual parts. You can be critical of acting performances, you can be critical of sound editing, maybe some aspects of cinematography or camera work. You can be critical over maybe some action set pieces. Action set pieces is something that we haven't really mentioned. Some of them, although a little bit awkward, with people
Falling
dying
over.
with no one no one anywhere near. I think like the majority of them were actually really, really good. Like the choreography on many instances was brilliant, and the costume design is fantastic. For what John Boorman had to work with at that time, with such a limited budget and a limited cast really as well, limited sets, everything was limited, but he created something which was way more than the sum of its parts. And what he said about wanting to have unknown actors so that people would concentrate on the story, that might be hard now for us because all of these actors that he gave a chance to have become incredibly well known. But at that point, what he was trying to do was get people to concentrate on the story. And when you do concentrate on the story and all of its elements and the individual character arcs, it's really written so well, and it's such an epic film. It is so epic, and not using the modern kind of idea of the word epic, like a film that's made with billions of dollars and has great visual effects and crazy over the top stunts and stuff like that. Nothing like that. It's just epic in terms of its storytelling and its characters. And at the end of the day, what brings me back to film time and time again is the story and the characters. And I think this film gets both of these aspects exactly right. Adrienne, do you have any final thoughts on the film?
I do. I definitely think that it's a film that you ought not to take at face value, that you have to go into the story thinking about and being open to the symbolic implications of all the different elements. And yeah, I've planned on continuing to study the Arthurian legend. I've read Howard Pyle's, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I'd love to get to Mallory's version. It's a long book, and then just to keep delving into the history and more of the medieval mindset and everything. So this is definitely part of all of that study for me.
Plenty of homework for everyone to do. I'm definitely going to rewatch this film as well, Manu. Like you said, I'm definitely going to revisit it. Seen it about 10, 15 times now. I think the more you watch it, the more you get out of it. So with that, thank you to everybody for listening to our analysis of Excalibur from 1981. Thank you to John Boorman and all of his cast and crew for creating this epic film that will stand the test of time. And Manu, thank you for joining us as well and giving your knowledge to the audience. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you?
Oh, thanks, Chris. It was fun. You can find me at manunited0710 on Twitter.
And where can they find some more of your in-depth film analysis?
Well, they can listen to me on the Exiles Network podcast, and we're on Spotify and Stitcher, and then they can find that podcast at the Exiles Net on Twitter.
Great stuff. Adrienne, where can the good people find you and talk about Arthurian legend with you?
I'm on Twitter at Truth Love Faith.
Excellent. And we're going to do a lot more of these in-depth analysis as well in the future on other films. Why don't you get into the comments below on YouTube or hit us up on Twitter at the Film Exiles. Tell us what other films you would like us to analyze in depth. I've been Chris. You can find me at Vinaldo7 on Twitter. But more importantly, give this video, if you enjoyed it, a like and share it with your friends. Give us a subscribe. We appreciate all of you, and get in the comments below and tell us what you thought of our analysis and what you would like to hear us analyze again in the future. Thank you once again for joining us, and until next time, stay exiled.